Thank you for this, Paul. Very useful. Now, as was being said, and something I heartily agree with, is dialogue is always better than monologue. And heck, I'm from government. You know, I mean, I'm bound to be dull. That's like, you know, it's a rule. So the more we can have questions and whatnot, the better. Now, what I want to talk about is something which is inherently dry to a large extent, which is Aboriginal Consultation Policy in the Government of Alberta. Now, I'll contextualize it a little bit. I mean, the Aboriginal population in Alberta, we've got the third largest in Canada. 6.2% of Alberta's population is Aboriginal. 117,000 First Nations, 48 separate First Nations, and 134 reserves. With Métis, we have the largest Métis population in Canada. And something I'm only going to touch on very peripherally is we have and have had a First Nations consultation policy for many years. A Métis consultation policy is coming, is being developed. But we're a few months away from announcing that. So, one thing I wanted to mention too, to help contextualize things, is that this month is the 250th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation. And as you probably know, the Royal Proclamation was in 1763 and established the formal legal relationship between First Nations and the colonies as they then were. And they basically structured an arrangement of legal rights whereby only the Crown could basically buy the land or acquire land from First Nations, and then only through treaty. So it was the foundation of the treaties that exist and are upheld today. Now, the other side of this coin is industry in Alberta. We are currently in the middle of the strongest period of growth ever recorded for any Canadian province at any time. Right now, there are around 230,000 active dispositions. Give or take, it's around 20,000 dispositions a year, sometimes more. Each of those dispositions, not everyone, but an awful lot, have to be assessed in terms of consultation. There's 100 million acres of Crown land that would be the subject of consultation. And we have more resources coming on stream all the time. Now, something else that Alberta's been doing to try and address this is they've been, what should we say, modernizing their government services. As you may have heard, they basically created something called the Alberta Energy Regulator. It's an arm's-length agency, which is like the BC Oil and Gas Commission. It's responsible for issuing all of the oil and gas, upstream oil and gas dispositions that are issued by the government. However, in creating this group, the government specifically said that the Alberta Energy Regulator cannot assess the adequacy of consultation. They are not the Crown. So, that has to be done somewhere. And really, the main purpose of this discussion is to show you how it's going to be handled. Now, This just gives you a sense of the treaty areas and where they are on the map in Alberta. But the policy is really what I want to talk about.
Dennis?
Yeah.
If I could just stop you now, I kind of want to go back. I've been sitting on this for a few minutes. Like a few years ago when the executive director of the state school spoke, someone attended and I said, so when are you going to have a new team policy? People are like, yeah, good question. And then, well, it's coming soon. And then, he spoke at CAP not that long ago, and I said, well, you're going to have a new team policy, and it's coming soon. And then CFAR, somebody was, I think it was the minister who was there.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not going to bother this time. And the last question, somebody put up their hand and said, when are you going to have a new team policy? And so the answer, and I recognize that there are challenges and difficulties and, all of that stuff. So with all due respect, I guess the question that I have is, what is the process? And I don't understand what's happening behind the scenes where this kind of, like, now we're going to start working on it now once we have the new office open. So has there been any work done, or what are we waiting for?
Nothing comprehensive in terms of creating the policy itself. Something like this, and the process we're going through now with First Nations is a process of dialogue. Now with Métis, the complication is legal. As I'm sure you're familiar with, the Powley decision makes it much more complex to determine and track collective rights for Métis groups. But just because it's tougher doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And the minister is, we got lots of room. The minister is very big on that. He wants to introduce the Métis consultation policy as soon as practicable.
Yeah. So, like, are people starting? Is there research being done? Are there ideas going forward?
There's lots of research being done, but right now, all this stuff I'm going to talk about today has been engaging all of our attention for the last couple of years. So, he's said it many times. I've heard him say it half a dozen times or more, that it's coming, and I want to bring this in while I'm still minister. And so he's committed. And really, I can't pin him down any more than that. But it'll happen. No, and thank you for asking the question. During this, feel free that if anything occurs to you, or if there's anything that isn't clear, I'm more than happy to be interrupted. Okay, now, the new consultation policy is actually a big deal. We passed it, or the legislature and cabinet approved it in August. And the fundamental principle is to respect First Nations treaty rights and traditional uses. Now, sometimes you get various First Nations who may not entirely agree with that. You're not really respecting the treaty rights. But the operating principle we've tried to go forward with is to do that. The role of the government in this is to ensure that treaty rights and traditional rights are observed and upheld. We also have an obligation to ensure that First Nations have the capacity to try and address that tidal wave of dispositions, which is overtaking us all right now. The new consultation policy and new consultation office are being specifically designed to kind of plug in the energy regulator and address that gap that was deliberately created, not allowing them to assess efficacy. And over the last, say, 20 years, since consultation has been serious business here, it's fragmented throughout government and you had different departments that had their own consultation branches and silos. And so if anybody wanted to find out how consultation was done, they had a heck of a job doing that. They'd go here and talk to this person and get this story, and you could go over there and get a different story. So that's, you know, not only is that bad business, but in terms of potential legal liability, it's really ugly for us. I mean, you know, if we're not doing things coherently, transparently, and fairly, then we can get sued. And if there ever is a suit, it's always the Crown that's named. So we carry the can for all of this on behalf of the people of Alberta. So it's, you know, that's why it's so incredibly important. We try and be fair, transparent, and equitable in all of this.
Just want to know more about your consultation capacity. Is that like a oil and gas commission model, or how do you deal with that?
Excellent question. We deal with it legislatively. And we're halfway through the process now. Not even halfway. But something I'm going to talk about is a new statute called the Aboriginal Consultation Levy Act, which basically sets up a regime where the government collects a levy from industry and then distributes the levy to First Nations based on their capacity needs. The government has done that before, and I'll get into it in more detail shortly. We've always had a consultation capacity fund that we've administered, but that fund to date has only been $5.6 million, which, when you think about it, ain't nothing. It's a drop in the bucket compared to what all First Nations need. So I'll get into that in a little more detail.
I have a question.
Yeah.
My name is Matthew, right?
Can you tell us where you're from, just so that we know where you're from?
Anyway, background, I worked for the Mixed Creek for about 5 years at the Consultation Office. Currently, I work for the Land Cree and the Director of Lands Conservation. Based out of Calgary. Now we're on a piece further. So, going back to your first slide, I think you wrote down respect First Nation treaty rights and traditional land uses. In my and Dennis, at the attended meetings where you presented this presentation, we always get a, for lack of a better word, you always get a mixed reaction when it comes to respecting First Nations treaty rights and traditional land uses.
Yeah.
As you know, there's a big disparity in wealth, resources, and capacity in the various First Nations. And I guess, and again, you have to look at the geography. Like where I'm from, the Mixed Creek, we tend to have a lot of water-based resource harvesting activities, and basically the waterways over highways. And I realize that further south, it's more land-based, it travels more space, more land-based. Therefore, we tend to practice our treaty rights, and I guess I'm speaking for myself, not for the First Nations. We tend to practice there's the ancillary rights or treaty rights. And one of the ancillary rights, you have to have the means. You can have all the wildlife, you can have all the resources in the traditional lands, but if you can't access the resources, like say for example where I'm from, I think we need just to make a point, you need about 2 feet of water. You need about, and this is just for a sake of illustration. I'm going to use 2 feet of water. So when we go out and hunt the boat, we go out and hunt the moose. We have an empty boat, and we load them 1,000 pounds of moose into our boat. So we need this level of water, and we have to transport the meat back to our own communities. And sometimes because of there's various arguments, because of water withdrawals from the Athabasca River. There's times, certain times in the year where we can't access our traditional lands. And the Mission Tree of Athabasca First Nation, we've proved several times in the past where we're able to access our traditional lands out on an empty boat, and we couldn't harvest the animals because of the, like I said, the draw wouldn't allow us to return back to our communities. And that's what I mean when I say we respect treaty rights and traditional land uses. Speaking personally, I don't believe you understand our treaty rights and traditional land uses. And I can go back again to the traditional land uses, so I agree with that.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, when I say we respect First Nations treaty rights, we may not always completely agree about the extent or specific nature, but we're committed to doing that to the extent we understand we can. Like even with the water table, something the Ministry of Environment has been working on for 5 years now is a series of management frameworks for various resources, including groundwater, subsurface water, and air quality. And as part of the restructuring of government, there is an impartial Alberta federal group which is monitoring the quality of the environment in these various media. And one of the things, hopefully, should be surface water availability in various parts of the province. So, I mean, you're saying that industry can be choking off something which is essential for your First Nation to basically...
No, I was making that. And then I respect the fact that you mentioned those long-term values. And I think there's been First Nations, there's been a law to have Aboriginal representation on the long-term values. Not only that, but also to incorporate our traditional knowledge into your research design and your long-term methodology. And to my knowledge, it hasn't been fulfilled.
I mean, I hear you. I mean, you don't have to convince me. I'm a firm believer in DK being part of the whole process myself. But, the whole monitoring agency is being put together and being designed now. But, I mean, all I can say is, speaking for Aboriginal Relations, we'll certainly advocate on your behalf and try and get that to happen. Now, one of the principal things that we've accepted as part of this is that the Crown has to be much more obviously involved in all aspects of consultation. In the past, it's simply been easier for the government to allow industry and First Nations to come to specific arrangements because industry is on the ground. They're the ones who are working there, and they know their project. First Nations are on the ground. They're the ones who know the land. So it almost seemed as though we would get in the way. The Supreme Court has been very clear that that's not good. We've got to manage the process. We've got to make sure the process is fair. We've got to make sure the process is transparent. So again, that's another reason why this revitalization of the Consultation Office is occurring. It says here, Alberta will increase its emphasis on regional and strategic consultations to establish a context within which project consultation can occur. And that's confusing as heck. There's no two ways about it. But I think what it means, regional and strategic consultations, we're going to be dealing with some of those cumulative effects issues. and trying to put things into a larger context so you can see the ripple effects of dispositions that are given, and try and take into account the actual impacts. And so the Consultation Office will have a coordinated and integrated relationship with the new Alberta energy regulator. Again, they're not going to do it. Effectively, Aboriginal Relations is going to act as a service agency to the energy regulator, providing advice, project management, whatnot, to deal with energy-related consultation. So the Consultation Office is basically going to take all of the resources that have been dispersed throughout environment, SRD, parks, etc., consolidate them, and basically lead in policy development and implementation, management and execution of the consultation process, pre-consultation assessments, determining which nations, First Nations, to consult and notify, direct consultation when significant adverse impacts may result, and most importantly, assessment of consultation adequacy. Capacity building, again, once we talk about the Consultation Levy Act, we'll talk more about that, and measures leading to increased consultation process transparency. And, like any service agency, setting standards, best practices, and quality assurance. You know, it's...
Just wanted to ask if you could maybe expand a little bit on the assessment of consultation adequacy, because I can see that there's different opinions what's adequate.
Yes.
So how is that maybe managed or addressed?
Well, I mean, there's two aspects to consultation, of course. There's the procedural aspect. We want to make sure that sufficient notifications have taken place, there's been a dialogue, there's a record, written evidence of what was discussed, when it was discussed, and what conclusions were reached. And with consultation adequacy, it's critically important that the consultation be taken seriously. Part of our problem was that in the old model, you would have consultation effectively take place without the government being involved. And that was not correct. The government is technically the only body which can consult with First Nations. If industry consulted, it would basically be as an agent of the government. And to be perfectly frank, we weren't treating that agency relationship as carefully as we should have. So, we want to try and redress that now and take over the responsibilities we sort of let slide to an extent. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, right? Because I could just sort of, I guess what I'm thinking of is sort of an on-ground example, you know what I mean? Because I heard some examples before where, you know, someone from industry would go and try to meet up with someone in the band office and couldn't meet up and just left some paperwork and then they thought they had consulted. That sort of thing, right?
Yes, I've heard that too.
Yeah.
You know, it's worked both ways where, you know, if you're the body that wants something and the other person has it, there's always a possibility for extortion, one way or another. But one of the things we're introducing is this consultation process matrix. And what it is, it's a graphic representation. I'm sorry, I should have had it on here, but it's still being developed like everything else. But it breaks consultation into 3 levels. Level 1 is basic procedural consultation, which mere notification may suffice or whatever. Level 2 is engagement, and where you need the record. And level 3 is in-depth consultation. Each of these will have its own matrix, and I'll show you where level 1 is, what you have to do, steps you have to follow to make that work. And there will be different matrices for each industry sector. So I'll try and make it as customized as we can. But the basic principle, which is we need evidence, we need some sort of oversight or process, is going to be followed. So, in concert with this, we know First Nations don't have the capacity now to deal with all the consultation requests they get. Just a question of the sheer scope. So, again, in an effort to make this all transparent and to bring it out, we drafted the Aboriginal Consultation Levy Act, which was passed in May 2013, but is not enforced. And it provides the authority for the minister to raise an industry levy for the specific purpose of increasing the consultation capacity. We are currently in the process of developing regulations, or we started the process of discussions around regulations which will operationalize how the levy is going to work, how it's going to be managed, how it's going to be distributed, and will operationalize the Act. And Crown-led consultation, which is basically level 3, will be funded solely by Alberta. And one of the things we're anticipating with this is that the new capacity funding system will enable us to ensure that adequate capacity funding flows where it should, and that First Nations have a reasonable chance of responding appropriately to consultation requests.
Will it be project-led, or will it be regional sort of approach?
That's the kind of discussions we're having now. Like you mentioned earlier, the BC oil and gas model. Well, of course, that's one thing that's being looked at. But we're at the point now of putting together. We're going to put together a steering committee that will have representation from First Nations and industry and government, and basically use them to oversee the hiring of a consultant. Could be one of the, alphabet soup consultants, whatever. But it'll be somebody who has experience in the field and knows what they're doing, and can come up with a series of proposals to make this process work. So it's important enough that we're not going to fiddle with it ourselves and probably mess it up. Bring in professionals.
Dennis, it's Steve Crocker with the PTI Group. We build remote site accommodation, and the Alberta government is our landlord in many of our locations. We lease land from the province, and we do consultations with First Nations on our developments. And of course, the office tells us who to consult with and that. In some cases, we've entered into, with particular First Nations, community consultation agreements, where we are paying them an annual amount every year for their consultation purposes and that kind of stuff. Would this Aboriginal Consultation Levy Act then replace that? And that's number one. Number two is, just coincidentally, I got I got an email from a particular First Nation where we've started a consultation, and then they've just sent us an invoice for $5,000 for screening. So I mean, will that replace that, or are we still having then two monies to one to give to you and one to give to the First Nation? I don't know.
I mean, it's not going to completely, like, it's not going to do away with IBAs, for example.
Well, we're not into IBAs, but
yeah,
yeah.
I'm just saying it's not going to be like the universal panacea.
Yeah.
But what we want to do is take the consultation capacity funding that now is just assessed on a project by project basis and basically track it and see how it's distributed. So, yeah, I think the answer is that yes, it probably will replace that, because if ideally the First Nation comes to you and says, you know, we need money for consultation, they would come to the government. And we would have a consultation levy fund.
And we pay into that fund
right.
with every application that we get. And you, the government, would then assess how much we are to pay you.
Yeah, essentially that's right.
Yeah.
Because it would be based on the amount of work that was being done and the amount of consultation which would be necessary. So, we're hoping it's going to be a fairer system.
I have a question. So, I'm going on a different page of Stephen there. So say in the event that First Nation triggers a hearing, like you got a hearing, and those are, you're giving pretty high numbers on the hearing, because you have the experts, legal experts, you have our elders or traditional knowledge experts. It's a very long process, right? And along with that, when you hear your hearing, along comes, we can also go to, I guess, go to the initial review. And now we're kind of escalating and taking things to an entirely different level, more complex than I think your matrix. Are those indicators in place for your matrix? Is that your matrix address those complexities that I'm bringing up?
No. And one thing that's been raised, which I wish I had a good answer for, but I don't, is an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. You know, just having some sort of arm's length body you could go to when you disagree. But we've been advised by the Court of Justice that that's not practical for us. So, all I can say is, you know, we basically have to follow what the justice lawyers tell us. But I agree, it makes intuitive sense to do it that way.
Yes, I think one of the things that is maybe the elephant in the room, I don't know, is, you know, you're public service and policy person. And, you know, I think most of us are aware that most of the First Nations in Alberta are not happy with this policy. So, you know, I think we have to kind of keep that in mind here. We don't want to shoot the messenger.
I've been shot before.
He's been shot before.
You seem like a nice guy. I can have arrow in your back. But I mean, I think, you know, we all have, you know, all of us here, whether we're from one of the communities or from industry, we know that that's the case. And so, you know, I think you're doing your best to put a good spin on this and talk about the positive features of the policy. But, you know, we know that, right?
Okay, let me say two things about that. Now, I said earlier that our job as government is to be kind of the impartial arbiter of this. The best way we can find that we've done our work is if everybody's pissed off about it. That way, you know, we know we're finding the balance somewhere. And the other side is also that you're not gonna please everybody. You can't do it. The nature of this kind of process, I won't say it's intractable, but it's very, very difficult. And the only way you're going to get it to work long term is by taking an evolutionary approach and building over time. And that's one of the things we're trying to do with this. Right? For example, with First Nations, many First Nations have their own consultation process or policies. And this, the new policy, will have a framework, a process by which the First Nations Indigenous Consultation Policy can be recognized by the government as fitting within the consultation framework and being the official policy. That's a big step. It's something we didn't have before. Other things we've done in the policy, we say that reconciliation is the fundamental basis for the policy. That's it. We explicitly put in the principles from the Mikisew case as the guiding principles for the policy. It may seem like baby steps, but we're taking them. We're trying to get to a place where there actually is reconciliation. I see, I think I'm running out of time here. So, let me just say the new office should be in place, should be up and operational by the end of November. We're anticipating. But, there'll be other elements coming, corporate guidelines, the regulations will come through, they'll be all public, and supporting matrices and operational guidelines, and the process agreements. So they're kind of the new things which are coming in. But let me know. I know there's a lot of stuff here. So feel free to contact me. If you have questions or if there's things which come up. But thank you very much for your time.